Welcome in, guys, to the first official episode of the Berserk podcast, whatever it happens to be named at this point. I'm not sure what it will be, but this is the first episode. I'm joined here by our mutual community friend, Mr. Swausage. Can you introduce yourself for us, please?
I am Swausage. I'm a streamer on Twitch. I love doing all sorts of games, variety, and then VR is a bit of something I have a passion for. Love playing VR games, all types. Yeah, man, thanks for having me on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you accepting the invitation and coming in and giving your time. As you were saying, we are going to talk about VR today. Virtual reality is something that has been approaching the space more and more and more. Games are trying to integrate them into it more and more and more. It's becoming a thing that people, just everybody, has in their space at home and are taking advantage of. And what makes you so passionate about VR? What makes it what to you makes it special as opposed to other things?
It's an escape for anyone with eyes. I mean, it's not really useful to people who are not apt to using VR if you have motion sickness, or I assume like you could probably be able to use VR as a utility in most ways, but for the average person, it has the capability of being a tool for work, leisure. It's just great. I love it. So to me, it's like I can use it for so many things. But it's got its own limitations, like everything else. But yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's always been something that's intrigued me, but being a person that wears glasses, it's always kind of scared me off of doing a lot of things with VR because I remember watching 3D movies in the heyday of that, going to the theater and having to wear glasses on glasses and always having that be a problem. But I know you've championed different kinds of lenses and stuff like that with the headset. So if you could give me just like a little lowdown of what exactly is involved in like a VR headset setup. Like I understand you've got like the headset and maybe displays and things that track your motion and things like that. But what's a good rundown of what a VR headset setup does?
Well, you've got right now a lot of different headsets, and some of them use what's called lighthouses. They're going to be two boxes. So you can use one, but the more you have, it allows the tracking to be kind of a little more dimensional. So when you put these lighthouses up, there's going to be a headset that will be taking these lights, and then in real time in the headset you're going to see all of that movement. If you block those lighthouses out, then the headset doesn't know where it's at. That's one way. And then of course you've got controllers that are, I think the standard controller now has more like finger tracking, and so you're gonna have some controllers that don't. The older ones, like the Vive, the HTC Vive, it's just they had wands, they had grip buttons. It was really cumbersome. If you had small hands, it was really hard to reach all the buttons. But they tracked his lighthouse. Now you've got the Oculus, which is much more kind of self-contained. So it's usually you're not tethered to anything. It's its own headset. There's no lighthouses, but the tracking needs light. You can't really play it in a dark room. It does have full hand tracking, so you don't necessarily need controllers, but it's not incredibly one-to-one yet. There's going to be a little bit of latency between where you have your hands, but in your play space you can just see your hands, and your hands are your controller. So kind of like how in like augmented experiences you might like tap your different fingers for different motions. In the same way in the Oculus, you would do that to access different menus, and it can see where your fingers are at. That's pretty cool, but it's not exactly practical for gaming. I think that's really cool for like social aspects. Like if you maybe were part of a deaf community and you were using VR chat to communicate, maybe those kind of tools would be more useful. But I think that a lot of the headsets do different things and have different purposes. For example, I really like the Index, but it's heavier than the Oculus. But at the same time, it is also tethered. Like it is completely, there's a wire that's always going to be attached, and it has to be attached. But it never runs out of like a battery. I mean, of course. So I mean, that's one part of it. So you're gonna have a lot of options, and I think that's the best part of the VR spectrum. Also, you're gonna also come into problems with your preference. So maybe you have glasses and you want to be able to swap the lenses out easily. Maybe there's a manufacturer that only makes lenses for particular headsets. So you've got some headsets that have a wider field of view. The Index, I really like. There's a knob that you can kind of like if you even get motion sickness, you can kind of like extend the view so that it's kind of puts like a little portal, and you know, but you can also bring it into where you've got a much wider field of view. Anyway, there's so much option with so many options with VR headsets. I love it, and I think that everyone it's kind of an expensive hobby, and people think, well, I don't want to spend hundreds of dollars finding my right headset, and that I think that's totally true. Like that's a fair assumption. But you know, if you've ever tried one, then you might already know what you would prefer aside from that experience. You're like, well, I wish I could have something that's lighter, or I wish I could have something that didn't have controllers. Like there might be an option for you, but starting out is certainly an experience by itself.
I was going to ask more about because one of the things that I hear a lot of people talk about is wearing them for extended periods of time. The weight of the device on their heads can cause like neck strain, or just like the batteries running on them because they require a lot of batteries. I could imagine that having something that was tethered, while it does impact the ability to like move around in your gaming space, might have a benefit of not running through, you know, batteries after batteries after batteries. But yeah, there seems like a lot of different companies that have different headsets and different articulation gear, and I mean. You also have a huge surgence of like the VTuber community using different aspects of VR to control their digital avatars, even down to like the very precise hand movements, hand motion, facial capture. It's kind of incredible.
Yeah, eye tracking, mouth tracking, and that's what people are expecting from future headsets too. They want you to be able to express yourself in the best way possible. And it really feels like some games that aren't really games like VR chat kind of push the limit of what a game can be. Like people are going out and buying all these adapters. Kind of like remember the old Game Boys. You would buy like all these accessories for your Game Boy.
Yeah, the double stick screen with the lights on it and the double pack on the back, like to expand the battery, and headphones and whatever else that you had for it. The thing ended up being 3 times as big as the initial unit, but you know.
So people put on their headset and they put on their vest and they put on their ankle trackers and their waist tracker, and then they're like, "All right, I'm ready to game," and then they go play VR chat.
It's full Ready Player One. That's where we're headed to. Speaking to immersion and presence, there's a lot of things that contribute to making you feel truly present in a virtual environment. I feel like all of these additions that we're speaking to now really just like add on to the immersion of being in the environments with all of these different things that can make you feel like physical impact, or can allow you to move more naturally within the VR space. How do you have any experience with some of those additional things, or are you curious to explore some of those different things in the future?
It's really interesting the way, basically, I suppose maybe it comes down to how does VR, especially with multiplayer, change the experience? Is that kind of like, because if that's so, the way because okay, video games are basically an art format, and the way you experience art is always going to be subjective. But the cool thing is why go to a museum with, by yourself? Like, why go experience art by yourself when you could bring some friends? Then you could talk about it. Maybe you can, you share that experience. And I think that that's ultimately what VR is, whether you're shooting zombies together with another person who you may have to reconsider on your zombie survival team, to like playing bowling or like shooting bow and arrows. You could sit down, and there's just so much more. Like, you can't really, you can do that with your flat games, but there are formats that allow you to experience a combination of those elements. So some games, let's say, take for example, I'm more familiar with a lot of my shooter games. So like PUBG, when it first came out, had 100 players in a lobby with open mics. And that was arguably to some people the best part of the game. And when they removed it, people got very upset. Understandably, why? We can all assume rightly.
I don't understand why 100 people with hot mics would be a bad thing.
Yeah, but it was. Well, some games like now today I play squad, and that puts 50 people, and with mods you can 100, but you still get these open mic lobbies, and I suppose those companies are willing to take more liability than some of the ones who don't. But I think that like those are really interesting moments, right? So when you have a lobby with people who so many people talking, you kind of experience, I'm playing a first person shooter, but I really like the social aspect, and that's where that comes from.
A lot of those games are pretty heavily moderated. Like I was just having lunch with my brother-in-law, and he was talking about how he was playing Call of Duty, and he is not a trash talker by any means, but his significant other started yelling at him from the other room, and the microphone caught it, and the new AI for Call of Duty banned him for 2 days because of the stuff that she was saying in the background that the mic picked up hot mic. So the moderation is getting pretty substantial in a lot of these games, and I can definitely see why it is starting to like move away from having like hundreds of 100 people in a lobby together. It only takes one person in that like experience to ruin the experience for 99 other people. And I guarantee you that once one person starts being egregious, it just promotes the other people to be egregious, and it's a toxic environment that just continues to spread toxicity. So they either have to be incredibly aggressive at monitoring it, or it is the Wild West out there, and you have to aggressively monitor your own community of the people that you play with.
Yeah. So you'll get a lot of things in multiplayer VR experiences that you otherwise wouldn't see in some of these games. So because of this social aspect being very heavy a part of VR, like playing VR without a mic, it's weird. You can play like a PC 2D game, no problem, without a mic. A lot of games may not encourage mic gameplay. Some do. But in VR and multiplayer experiences, it's almost like it's weird to be in a room with somebody else and they can't talk, and then even more so, then they start using hand gestures, and it's like to communicate, which is anyway. So that's the thing. So like I've played games where if they don't like you, or maybe you're playing with somebody who's too young to be playing with a VR headset, they'll come over and like take the magazine out of your gun, or they'll shoot you, or they'll come and make sexual gestures to you and shit. There's a lot of weird things that can happen in a VR space when you have that extra dimension of personability. I don't really know how to express it, but it's almost like that Wild West of gaming where, it's not, how do you regulate that? Do you get more AI involved? There's a lot of weird circumstances that can happen.
One of the things I'd pose to you is, speaking of gaming experience within the VR spectrum, what is some of the most impactful VR gaming experiences that you've had? Like, name a couple games that are your like top tier experiences while using VR, and we'll talk about like social VR afterwards, VR chat afterwards. But what are a handful of VR games that you're like, if you have a VR headset, you have to play these games, and why?
I think Into the Radius is one that comes to mind. I recently beat it, and I took my time to beat it because I liked it so much, but it's available on Oculus and PC. Now, the reason why is because it gave me an appreciation for kind of combat using a firearm. So if you're going into a military experience, you may think that you have all of these logistical resources, but you as a person, if you are out on a battlefield, you only have what you can carry. You only have what's on your vest, on your person. And so when it comes down to like laying down suppressive fire, you're just burning through your rounds if you're not hitting anything. And at some point you may run out of ammo and nobody can help you. So basically Into the Radius is a game that teaches you that, where it's like you only have so many magazines. Maybe you can't afford as many magazines. So you only have 3. You know, maybe you put 1 in your gun, you have 2 on your person. And it talks about in a very passive way how to manage those kind of things. So I learned very quickly, if I have a magazine in my firearm and I have 4 magazine pouches, I only put 3 on my pouch, because when I reload, I want to reload my magazines later. So I take the magazine out, put it in the empty slot, and then take out the new one. I don't take four magazines and then burn one out of my gun. So when you're talking about a survival role and a game that's going to teach you things that a 2D game can't really do, it's those components. And then on top of that, it's about speed. You know, maybe you're getting shot at and you need to reload your firearm. You need to do it quickly. You need to be able to, you know, do it efficiently. And those are not things that are taught to you in a 2D space.
Yeah, I mean, video games and movies in general have taught us, hey, you have infinite magazines for your guns. Like, magazines are not affected by anything, and also they don't, you know, with some of the very realistic survival games that are out there, you have to reload every magazine, singular bullets at a time, and when it takes you, you know, 2 minutes to reload a magazine, and your magazines are limited in their nature, tossing one on the ground is, you know, I mean, in a military scenario where every absolute second matters, and you can replenish your magazines back at your secure location or whatever, like you're not getting ammo resupplies where you're having to individually load bullets. Sure, that is definitely a thing, but like, you know, be a little, you know, drop your mags. Who cares? But when you're in a survival game, having to find magazines for your guns, having to find the ammunition that is the specific type for the specific gun you're using, I mean, it can make you change your entire thing of like, oh, I still need to go for a long period of time, and I have no bullets for this style of gun, but I found a bunch of ammunition for this other style of gun. Maybe I leave my gun here and go and pick up this other gun that I have a bunch of ammunition for. And it just sucks that you have to leave your gun there, but like, I mean, it's about surviving the level, right?
Yeah, it teaches all of that in it. What you just mentioned is a skill. It's a battlefield skill that the everyday person's not going to learn. And I'm not saying that you have to go learn this, in as much as it's a skill you can learn. You want to go learn to bowl or drive a car, there's options for that in VR. But if you want to learn how to use a firearm and exist on a battlefield without risking your life on a dangerous level, you know, maybe that's a skill you can learn. And that's part of what VR offers. But what's crazy is the reality of something that's left to a military experience, and solely to a military experience, because I mean, they're being taught to kill people. You know, that's a skill left to professionals. And yet here we are with a very if you consider it an elementary experience compared to that, it is an over elementary or above average, elementary experience of a combat role. And it teaches you these things. But again, though, I feel the philosophy of it is still important, you know, such as taking only what you need and using only when it's appropriate. Those are skills that will teach you things. If you're playing with a team of people and they run out of magazines or ammunition or whatever, even in survival games, maybe they keep, you know, using a lot of a certain resource that you're like, dang, you know, this person might need some help. Yeah, that's, you know, it teaches you things about, I mean, there's lots of games that can happen when you put the social aspect in, but it's like when you're talking about like a military combat role, that's a really like virtual experience that you otherwise wouldn't exist in. And it kind of teaches you like, wow, this is why maybe militaries have such conformity. Maybe this is why, you know, you have to do things a certain way. One example, the communication is interesting. You can't, if let's say, for example, I were to put a bunch of military veterans versus a bunch of like 15-year-old Quest kiddies, and they're all like playing the same gun game. Why do you think that the veteran players would likely win? I don't think. That the ability the playing field is the same. It comes down to communication and training, and which they don't have. But that doesn't mean that they can't learn it. Again, like the playing field.
The conversation stuff, like I like to use like CS:GO as an example, and the locations of the different objectives and the map locations and stuff like that, or Valorant as a more recent example. Just the military style communications of how to identify where a location is and what the situation is. Very precise communication of where things are, how many people are there, what they're wielding. Where your movement is, being as precise with it, and using the least amount of saying the least amount to say the most, right? And communicate the most clearly of what you're talking about. That is very much a thing of like, oh, you've been in a life or death situation, you know how this feels, versus kids complaining about not being able to properly identify a thing, or just running in and dying for no reason whatsoever, and they're like, oh man, I can't believe I died. This is unfair. This is OP.
I'm sorry. I had an uncle who would always tell me when I was younger, he would be like, the military's training you, they're brainwashing you, they're trying to make you a soldier. We'd play Call of Duty or Battlefield, and he'd just be like, you guys don't know what this is. They're training you. And we're like, okay, thanks, uncle. Like, but then I see the VR stuff and I'm like, okay, this is.
They're trying to be realistic, right? And in being realistic, there is a bit of training you for it, right? And that's not just present in military games. That's present in a lot of different kinds of games. I specialize in Dark Souls games, and that game teaches you right off the bat to expect to die a lot, because the first enemies that you fight in the game are built to destroy you. To kill you, and to put into your knowledge that you're going to die a lot during playing this game, and that is part of the process that you will either enjoy about these kinds of games or you won't. And so military games, that's part of the process. Like if you're dying in a couple hits, well, that's very realistic. Like if you get hit with a bullet in combat, even if it's not lethal, you are rendered inert from the fight. For the most part, like. And so that's just a realistic thing. But moving on a little bit from gaming, I know that you have extensive experience in VR chat. You play a lot of VR chat just by yourself with your friends. Explain to me some of the things that you really like and maybe are drawbacks, the benefits and the detriments of such a thing as like a platform like VR chat.
Oh man, I love using VR chat. In fact, VR chat is so good. There's a reason it is the top like multiplayer game for VR right now. And a lot of people might try it at first and say, I have no idea what the buzz is about. But it really comes down to using it. Once you get rid of the noise and you kind of cater the experience to something that's more personable, it becomes a really interesting game. And you wonder, wow, like, how am I spending so much time on something that's not really, it's a game, but it's not really a game. It's more of a platform for experiences. So I like to use it for work sometimes. And that's like where I'll have something I'm working on and I can pull up virtual windows in my play space. And a VR chat, of course, allows me to go to any world I want, and I can experience and interact with those worlds however I want. I can choose not to. Maybe I just like the way it looks. So maybe I want to go write a paper on the top of a misty mountain, or maybe I want to go watch TV in a spaceship. There's so many ways that you can kind of combine your experiences. So for example, the other night I was in a world which was like a house with a old 2000s television, like kind of like the broader flat screens. Anyway, it has, it's got like Christmas trees and everything, and it's snowy outside, and it's really cool. It's a nice little like neighborhood kind of world. And I chose to put on some Mystery Science Theater on the TV, and then I had my virtual windows up with like some Pokemon cards and some RuneScape, and And then, maybe I had like Reddit on the side, and I could spawn as many of these as I want. I'm just like ADHD multi-braining here. And then I have my buddies come through and they'll, be talking to me. So I'm just having a conversation with people, watching Mystery Science Theater and having all these virtual window play spaces. And the best part is like, otherwise you'd have so much energy costs related to so many screens and monitors. And then, then there's the hassle of doing like Discord and so much stuff. And it's like VR chat allows you to just kind of unify everything in one experience. And it's so cool. So that's how I choose to use it, and why I like it so much. But other than that, again, there's like, bro, you can go fly planes. You can go ride a roller coaster.
I've seen some of the VR chat worlds, just like people building their mansions and having all kinds of crazy avatars and setting up games within the virtual space that look really awesome. And then, just everybody gets to be whatever they want to be in that virtual space, right? And, if you want to be a big purple dinosaur, awesome. If you want to be an anime character, awesome. If you want to be Hank Hill, awesome. Like, you could be anything you want. I think that is an attractive thing for a lot of people, moving into the Ready Player One space of like, you can make your avatar anything you want, and you can have your game world be anything you want. That's alluring to a lot of people for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the cool thing about these experiences is that the way you share them can kind of alternate the way you use the tool. I don't know any people who regularly use these programs, but I know they exist, and they're still around. They have yoga classes, so maybe you have like leg trackers. You don't have to have them, but like you can kind of contribute to the class and the immersion of it all. But you can visit regularly scheduled yoga classes. They have AA meetings, so if you can't or you don't like to be around people in person, maybe you have this problem, but you want to take care of it, and you want to do it without your anxiety peaking all the freaking time. Like maybe
anonymous. Talk about being anonymous. You're not even using your physical body to be in the thing. And for a lot of people that are dealing with like Alcohol Anonymous or whatever, truly being able to be anonymous in that space and truly being able to be honest with the people that you're sharing your stories with is a powerful thing, right?
Absolutely. And that's what I love about this. And again, I was talking about some of the like users, the deaf community. They have a heavy online presence in like VR chat because you can sign. You can use your fingers, you can use your hands and all sorts of motions. And the tracking
you can also chat, right? Like you can just type your chats out as well, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So if you have a friend and you can type to each other, and vice versa, if they can sign to you and you can type back. You don't have to know sign in order to communicate with someone, or maybe you're more comfortable reading than writing. So like Mellors is fluent in ASL, American Sign Language, and she can probably she still has some parts of the sign that she has to remember. But I'm thinking that anytime I've ever asked her to, hey, can you what are they saying? She can read sign like that. So I mean, I can imagine it's more comfortable, more your comfort zone. And again, VR chat is one of those platforms that allows you to kind of toggle between how you prefer your experience. It's a catered, personable experience that you can have with other people that in another game you may not, I think that it's a great tool for that. So, I mean, aside from all these classes, you've also got, you've got, like I said, you've got work and your leisure, and I mean, just the tools, the multi-tool of it. How would you want to use it? The drawbacks, of course, are like your limitations. Maybe you get nauseous, and
so like motion sickness is a pretty big concern, right? Within the space, like I feel like there's a lot of things that the human body does to not get motion sick. Just like having a firm axis of Y and X on your own body and knowing where the ground is and up is, and you get a lot of these videos of people wearing VR headsets for the first time, and then they like look off of a cliff and they fall and they trip over nothing because they think it's there because your brain thinks it's there. They think they're in the situation they are, and it can be really disorienting.
It really is. I've heard people doing multiple things to kind of combat that. Um, I've recently kind of adjusted the way I think of VR stamina. Is kind of what I call it. There's like multiple inhibitors that you can experience if you are either new to VR or maybe you're just genetically susceptible in one way or another. So like I've heard people putting fans. You can just kind of put a fan in front of you and it kind of helps you orient which way is forward at all times. Which by the way, I like doing that with like Truck Simulator or something because it feels like, you're driving a truck and there's wind. Anyway, I think but that's a really good way to help with VR sickness. There's a lot of tools in game that kind of like, there's like a teleporting, there's, vignette experiences, there's snap turn, smooth turn. But one other thing that if you have access to it is motion sickness pills. I suppose that there's some over the counter options here in the States anyway, that you have access to. You can just get motion sickness pills. And I've heard that helps. But again, like I've kind of readjusted the way I think about it because it's not really, there's no real concrete thing. Some people say it works. Some people say it doesn't. Whatever method is you're choosing, you just got to find what works for you. But overall, I kind of go back and forth on, just kind of building up tolerance. So if you use your VR often, you're not so susceptible to getting motion sickness. But
yeah, the more often you do a thing, the more your body's going to become accustomed to it. So
yeah.
At least for most people, I'm sure that there are some people where it doesn't matter how long they're going to spend in VR, they're still going to get motion sick. I mean, I can't read in a car or I'll get motion sick or whatever. Totally fine anywhere else, but if I try and read in a car for whatever reason, it makes me motion sick. And I'm sure the same thing applies to a lot of people as well. So, but yeah, the more you play it, hopefully that kind of thing will mitigate itself. But obviously developers also are adding in those features to try and make it so that people are not going to be susceptible to motion sickness as much. And you were also talking about like VR making things more accessible for people with disabilities, how it's incredibly good for people that are deaf, just having different ways to interact with people in a more visual way. Yeah
those are really good parts of virtual reality, is kind of like expanding communities and awareness too, because you can just be like, oh sorry, they don't, you have to sign or type to them, they're they can't hear you. But in the same way that like how VR chat has a really big music community and DJ community, so there's a lot of concerts and things that you can go to. Communities like the deaf community may not want to go to one. They do have interpreters and stuff that you can witness at these events, but it's a lot of times they like to feel the music and being there. And sometimes again, like for accessibility reasons, maybe they have trouble getting there. Again, it's you can go to these virtually, and maybe you have a haptic vest. Maybe someone might choose to have that to kind of experience. That's a big part of their experience. Maybe you can't, if you like playing gun games, but you can't hear well, maybe a haptic feedback will let you know where, when you're going to that. By the way, that's something I'd like to talk about, is a vest is really interesting.
Yeah, go ahead. Talk about the vest, the haptic feedback on like the vest. And I know people also have like the things for their legs and arms and stuff like that to go with the haptic feedback.
Yeah, there's so the vest is really cool. You'd think it's mostly for gun games. It's not. It's just like if I wanted to give you a hug, I think that there are, if I'm not mistaken, there are games that use those vests to kind of just feel the pressure of where you're having that experience. And so you can use these vests in different ways, but mostly again like so like they found that when you had these vests on, that when you say, for example, you threw a grenade, and in a game, normally you would have to judge a grenade's distance by the sound, maybe by a marker that's indicated. those are all ways to kind of help communities experience the game the same way. With a haptic vest, you can feel it. You can feel the distance of a grenade explosion. So you don't need these unnecessary markers or the loudness and everything like that. It's accompanied, of course, with the volume. But if you have trouble hearing or maybe you can't hear, something like a haptic vest allows you to experience a game the same way as everybody else. So they may be able to hear it. You can feel it. But again,
it's just the same thing as like playing colors at a concert or whatever. To have deaf people be able to experience the music is
right.
Having just an alternate way to experience the same thing, because being able to hear, like even having the video game sound like physically have the bass impact your body in that way. Yeah. You can feel it even if you can't necessarily hear it.
Right. And you may even be hard of seeing, which can, again, like VR kind of brings you into an experience outside of your home, and you don't have to worry about your safety, around other people or things. So like, if maybe you're deaf, you might, going to a shooting range might actually, I mean, like that might be nice to some degree, but it's also dangerous.
Hopefully ranges are relatively safe. They should be. You don't hear too many people getting shot at a range or whatever. But I mean, like it removes the element of danger from a situation, right?
Right. Exactly. The simulation of it all. Yeah, it's really good. I just like the way that it's kind of changing the way gaming can be experienced, and arguably the social aspect is more or is just as appealing as the activity you're engaged in.
Yeah, it's definitely enhanced the social experience for sure, because or the social experience and the immersion, right? I mean, like when I think of things that I want to do in VR, it's like I want to play Resident Evil 7 in VR. Like I want to explore that creepy house in VR and have like the creepy monsters be like up in my face. I want to lose control of my my like normal shield wall of being able to just like power through these horror games without pushing through any real emotion, any real terror, and actually have the experience of being scared in like a true real way.
That's how you get it too. I think the novelty wears off though after a little bit, but you'll still be surprised by really good experiences because they're always making new games, take advantage of new mechanics and
sure. And I mean, like in addition to like the gaming space, right? There's a lot of things that VR is used for. We sort of tiptoed around this with like talking about military tactics and using it for training and stuff like that. But VR is being used for a bunch of different stuff. It's being used for medical training. It's being used for military stuff. It's being used for historical simulations. It's being used for, all of these different things. How do you feel like that? Like you were even saying yourself, you use it as a way to help you study and work on projects that you would have a problem with focusing on in the space that you reside in.
Yeah, man, it lets you do a lot of cool things that otherwise would be a little expensive. So like I was managing like maybe costs associated with having multiple monitors or multiple computers, and then running the TV and all the lights on, where there would be many times when Mellors and I had a lot of my studio equipment in the same room as our bedroom. She'd be sleeping for the next day. And so we'd have all the lights off in the room, and because I have lighthouse tracking, which uses infrared lighting, by the way, so the room's completely pitch black to the human eye, and so she's able to sleep, and I just put on my headset, and I'm in like a well-lit daytime room watching TV with all these well-lit monitors in front of me.
Yeah, you're totally done. You're totally fine. Yeah. You have everything you need,
Right. I'm completely removed. And again, so it's like I'm saving on not only like I'll just turn my lights off. Energy costs are all in that VR. I mean, my power supply, I know exactly what it's capable of running. I mean, I suppose at its max, you might as well be running the microwave for a few hours, but I mean, at the same time, though, you're getting a great experience out of it, and I mean, maybe it's arguably like better than having 4 monitors and 2 computer towers, and but it just depends on how you like to use that. But again, like
As a person that has 3 monitors in front of them at an almost constant period of time, man, there are sometimes I wish I had 5. I mean, like I would certainly utilize the having monitors in all different directions ability of VR to expand to my space for sure.
Yeah, you can expand it, or maybe you're like, you know what, I just want 1 monitor today. You don't have to go in and remove them all and put them away. I think that one of the expenses associated with training is completely, well, like the expenses associated with training, excuse me, are just completely removed in some of these virtual, maybe the cost of the game, but like maybe I want to go learn to drive a truck. Maybe I have a wheel or a shifter or anything. I can learn to do that. Maybe I want to go learn to fly a plane. Maybe I have that.
All those simulators are just absolutely astronomically improved by VR, right? Like playing, like I've seen you play, truck driver simulator in VR a ton, and there are truck drivers that play truck driver simulator in VR, and they just like that's what they do. They have their wheels set up. They play the entire thing with everything being as realistic as they possibly can get, and run their routes and stuff. And that stuff is very impressive. People with like that tens of thousands of dollars of various like racing setups and stuff to make their physical experience as real as possible. Shifters, pedals, everything. And that seems wild. I mean, like everything that you can think of that has like a huge amount of cost and high amount of risk associated with it. Medical stuff, teaching doctors how to do surgeries on patients that won't get hurt, with resources that aren't getting expended, with assistance. Like you have the ability to provide hand-on education for things that have an incredible amount of risk and incredible amount of cost. Astronauts, aircraft pilots, drivers of all kinds of varieties, whether it's a truck driver or a crane driver, or a person driving a cat or any other construction equipment. You just have the ability to train people in these really high risk, high cost scenarios without putting a risk of their lives or the risk of other people's lives, the risk of, equipment that costs, millions or tens of millions of dollars, aircraft pilots, like Microsoft Flight Simulator, not to shout out Microsoft Flight Simulator specifically, but, like there were a lot of people when I worked at GameStop that would come in every year. They were looking for that Microsoft Flight Simulator because they had $2,000 or $3,000 setups at home that they were trying to, like, they're like, I could go get my pilot's license, but I can't afford a plane. I have this set up at home. I love flying planes.
Welding's another one. You can learn to weld.
Welding.
There's a lot of tools that are pretty expensive with some of these costs. Maybe painting. Maybe you want to, like, painting is a big one that there's so many tools. You can learn to paint, mix colors and brushes, brush sizes, and you can even undo mistakes where, in real life you have a canvas that, I added a wrong color, or I worked on the wrong layer, or I wanted to add this. Well, in VR you can make some. Now, of course, you don't have a tangible canvas experience, but if you just want to learn a skill or train with mitigated costs, that you're looking at VR being a great way to do that. You kind of miss out on some. It is a trade-off. Like, you're not going to have a brush in your hand, and the feeling of a brush on canvas is an experience of its own. Like, I know that sounds crazy, but I mean, to a painter, that's a valuable tangibility that you take away. Where if you remove that, what does the experience mean? And that's debatable amongst the discipline, but I think that ultimately, when you're teaching a skill, and if you're trying to, especially with fundamentals, you could argue that VR would be good for that. And maybe you'll be like, I thought I wanted to paint, but it's just not for me.
Well, there's always going to be some things that have a difficulty transcending mediums, but like in reference to art, while VR specifically might not necessarily be the thing that brings out an artist, there's the act of having a tablet that you can literally draw on your tablet and have that same kind of experience as putting a pen to a piece of paper or a brush to a canvas. You still have that ability of just hitting like Shift Z, and now your weird stroke goes away, and it makes the entire process of creating things using that digital medium that much faster, that much easier, that much better for people that are trying to learn. Without you can go through and spend 3 or 4 hours on a piece. And if you're doing it in, actual like pencil, pen, paper, paints, whatever, and you make a wrong brush stroke or something like that, you can feel like hours and hours have been wasted, or you have to spend a lot of time trying to cover it up. And in a digital medium, you just hit a button and it goes away. And even you could hit a button, make it go away, and then be like, oh, actually it was fine. Put it back on exactly as it was before. Or you could take everybody has problems making things exactly the same. You could draw the perfect eye and then copy it to be the perfect, pair of eyes, and that kind of thing is very interesting within that digital space.
Yeah, I think there's some that also not just reversing time, but fast forwarding through time. In painting, you got to wait for paint to dry, man. If you want to add another layer, you got to wait. Sometimes it takes a day. So you got to wait. Same thing with other, like there's Mechanic Simulator in VR where you have to order parts. You don't have to wait a week. You don't have to experience getting wrong parts. You don't have to play the waiting game. That experience is brought to you right away, and you can get back into the training and get to it. There's a lot of things that VR is able to kind of hoop you through without having to go through the thing of waiting. But I do think that there is an element removed when you do kind of go through these. It's like, well, when you go to experience the real thing, if you want to go build a car, you have to learn how to wait for things. You have to learn good things will come, man, but you got to learn to, it's don't be mad if that Amazon package on those parts you order is going to take a while. Because it will happen. You have to occupy yourself with something else. Go learn another skill.
The reality of reality. The sad reality of reality.
Yeah, so you gotta have to be aware of what you're taking away in that experience if you really want to learn a skill. But I think most people are apt to understand, hey, this is a simulation. It's not like it's gonna appear at my door.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people these days even have unrealistic expectations of that. As a person that's done a lot of time in the e-commerce space, if you order something, people want it the next day because that's how Amazon has created that to be, be the regular. But, in actuality, sometimes, especially when you're working with a small business, it can take days and days for something to show up because they aren't Amazon with their own, fulfillment system. So. Yeah, the restrictions of reality are apparent when you try and take some of that practice into the out of the virtual space and into the real world space. But
yeah, we don't want to perpetuate that, but I think that's kind of what you're asking for when you want to just expedited experience with efficiency. You can take some sacrifices there. Nothing's perfect in that.
I know that you wanted to talk on maybe some of the psychological impacts that VR can have, some of the things, or some of the situations where VR can be used to address mental health issues like anxiety and other things. Are there any specific examples you want to bring up for yourself, if you're willing to do that, or just things that you might have heard or experienced from other people where virtual reality has had a positive impact on people's mental health?
So the one thing I want to mention is that PTSD for military drone flyers is a real thing. And they experience the same amount of PTSD that a frontline soldier does. And they go through the exact same ethical issues, the exact, when your job is to eliminate the enemy, and by all means, that definition, they're doing that on a daily basis. It'll mess with you. Now, of course, that's an arguably like inner moral ethical thing, but let's just not forget that is a developing
Yeah, I
Like,
mean, there are a lot of people that are drone pilots that are utilizing VR interfaces to control their vehicles and do whatever their missions are, remotely.
exactly.
And they're sitting in a chair in like North Carolina or something like that, but they're flying a drone that's in, the Middle East doing whatever it's going to do, right? And that is a thing that is causing mental problems
Yes.
within that space, and that's something that's also being more and more utilized. Like there are more active drones than there have ever been, doing all kinds of things from reconnaissance to actual combat.
Yeah.
And that's just going to continue to go up and up and up, because anytime an army can utilize a resource that isn't sacrificing a person in their army, and rather can sacrifice a piece of technology in order to win a conflict, they're going to try that, right? And it is way less expensive to lose a drone. Like you could talk about the moral standpoint of it all, but when people are looking at the giant military structure, it is much cheaper for a drone than it is to train a human to do anything, right?
Well, you also give more combat roles to combat soldiers. You have specialized military personnel that are apt for drones, and they're my uncle again. It's like, you think you're just because you're not playing a military game, they're not training you for the military, and it's like now we've got drone pilots in VR to be completely in the battlefield, and it's not just for immersion. It's not because it's cool, it's because it's useful. It's a utility thing. And the more you put on a VR headset and you get this VR stamina that I like to call, and you personally put yourself on this battlefield virtually, you're going to feel at home, and it's kind of a bad thing. I think that because a lot of the youth have access to VR headsets, it's kind of the new tablet thing. You just kind of give your kid a tablet and then they're occupied. You have a lot of VR play spaces that are just infiltrated with youth, and it arguably changes the community, because you get this dichotomy of youth and older players who just want to play the game. But ultimately, though, you kind of get this latchkey kid, this type of neglected child who just does a lot of learning in VR, and it's like, wow, if we're teaching these things to people, maybe having these youth grow up what does that do to the psychology? We don't know.
Well,
that's a developing thing.
To this specific topic, there's a movie and a book. Well, it's a book before it was a movie, but there's a piece of media called Ender's Game. I don't know if you're familiar with it at all, but it is a series that is primarily built on a character named Ender. He's a small child. And he is incredibly intelligent, and he is working towards a program to work with the military to fight this alien race that is supposed to be a huge threat to the military. And over the course of the story, he's put through a bunch of rigorous trials, test, virtual reality combat scenarios. And spoiler alert for anybody that doesn't know it, they find out very far into the story that a lot of these combat scenarios are actually taking place. They are actually fighting with actual soldiers, and they are controlling actual combatants in battle with all of these simulations they're doing. And so the reason that the military personnel is putting so much pressure on them to succeed isn't because they want them trained for these scenarios. It is because they are using these children to conduct these incredibly high-level tactical space battles with these aliens for legitimate control of these territories in the defense of Earth. And so the series goes on past the first story, which is called Ender's Game, and digs into some of the ramifications of what happens, because Ender obviously finds out that this happens, and is the result, and finds out that his decisions that he made are the result, or resulted in billions of lives being lost, and or lives being saved, is however you're the way that you want to look at it. And he actually goes on to learn more about the alien civilization that they were fighting, that the military demonized for them, and yada yada yada. On and on and on. But this is a thing that has been popped up in media, been used in various movies and stories and stuff like that, where People assume that they're doing things within virtual reality spaces, and they are being trained for military usage, and they are actually being put into military practice. And that is a scary thing that it could truly be. But also, Occam's razor, simplest things are the simplest things. While the people that are making, Call of Duty and Battlefield and whatever else are making military games, and they are using proper military tactics, proper military training, they aren't necessarily building these games to get people to join the military. They're trying to be as accurate as they possibly can, as real as they can. And it's going to teach you things that are going to be beneficial to military practice, right?
It's a little elementary in some cases, but they're pretty fun. They've got a game called Pavlov VR where there are maps that people have modded, and they put in tanks, and you can be the driver, you can be the loader, and that requires you to go through the motions of loading a shell into a tank cannon, pulling the lever, letting it, ejecting the shell, put in a new one. Like they have these kind of things. It's crazy how we're getting these blended experience. You never want, are they training you or is it for fun? Well, how do you use it?
Yeah, there's a game on my wish list, and I'm not even like a huge VR person, but there's a game called PVKK, which stands for Planet and Veritigunguskuna Commandant or something like that. Some really ridiculously long game. But it's essentially a game where you play a planetary defense cannon operator. And so you live and operate within this planetary defense cannon. And in order for you to defend your planet against the things that are flying at it, you have to do all of the actions within the turret or whatever to defend your area of your planet or whatever. And it seems incredibly awesome, incredibly immersive to me. And if they do plan on having VR associated with it as well, and it just seems so, because it has everything. It has like you have a little living space where you have like pictures and stuff like that, and you have a radio that you can turn on in different channels, a locker, you change your uniform out or whatever. But then it's like alarms go off. Okay, asteroid coming in. We need to go in and we need to rotate the cannon to a certain thing. You got to do this thing. Oh no, the rotational thing is clogged. You got to climb down the bowels of it and grease the thing and remove the blockage from it, and then go back up and rotate the cannon and then power up the cannon. And then you got to, actually fire the cannon or whatever and do all the different million actions that are required with it. And that seems incredibly fun to me, because it's war, obviously, but it's a fantasy thing. It's a fantasy experience, and they're generating a lot of those kinds of VR experiences that, like, what was the line puzzle game that you're playing? There's The Watcher, I think it was called. I know that game is in VR, and that game is just an immersive world that has a million different puzzles in it, and has nothing to do with war or anything like that, even though it has some pretty weird audio logs in it. But like it's immersive in that you're just in this space, and literally anything you see could potentially be a puzzle. And you start out with like very simple line puzzles, but then all of a sudden you're on like an observatory tower and you're looking down on a mountain range, and the mountain range itself could be a puzzle that you're trying to solve. And having those experiences are incredibly cool and incredibly immersive, and gaming is just becoming, much more that as things kind of go on. So to that point, what are the things that most excite you about the potential of VR moving forward? Because there's a lot of exciting elements to VR, and for me, I'm hoping that that hopefully we get to the point where you won't really need a huge headset and a huge amount of things to make VR present. I hope that the technology becomes smaller and more affordable, but that's kind of like the nature of technology for me in general, is things get smaller and more affordable as time goes on. But what are some of the things that for you, you really want VR to expand into?
Well, right now it's kind of cool because VR used to be like it used to be kind of a gimmick. It used to be, a lot of people would say it's just not there yet, and sometimes I would agree. And there just wasn't any good games. We were kind of exploring what we could do with VR headsets. Now that we know the limitations and like what you can do with them software and hardware. It's that's what's created this complex market. So no one's unified anything yet. But that's because we were in such a testing stage. People were just kind of pushing boundaries in very specific ways. Well, how much field of view can I get? And then you get the Pimax. You get like so one that you mentioned, how small can you make them? Big Screen Beyond is a headset that people have been having their eyes on. Unfortunately, the drawbacks to like that is you need a custom fit kind of like cushion for your screen. There's a lot of drawbacks to making them smaller, but there's a lot of drawbacks to making them bigger as well. So weight is a huge one. The first time I had a VR headset, I started having neck pain, and I didn't know where it was from. I thought it was my pillows, and and then it occurred to me after about a month, the pain went away, and I was like, Oh, it was my
neck
headset.
Muscles. Yeah.
Yep.
Seems like you need to go to the gym and get that neck muscle exercises going. Strengthen up that neck for that VR headset.
Yeah. So I think what's going to come down to, it's no longer about who can make an actual game with VR. That's been done. Now it's like now it's about competition and options. Who's going to be the first one to make the MMO? Because there's a couple of them. And
the MMO VR game. Yeah.
They're fucking terrible. City building, you got a couple of them. They all kind of suck. There's something about each and every one of them that's just, it's a good game. It's a good concept. But, now it's not just about what gimmick is going to stick. It's more like, how can you unify all of this into a comprehensive experience? So Half-Life Alyx was praised to be a great game because it didn't just take the visual aspect and make you feel like you're in a real moist, dank, dusty city in the Half-Life world, but also give you these really awesome puzzles. They have a horror sequence where you're being chased by shit, and you just, they put you in pitch blackness. They put you in the bright of day. They take all of those elements. They don't just take, like the best of the horror genre, the best of the shooter genre, the best of the visual of VR, and they put it in one experience. And to this day, Half-Life Alyx is still one of the best games. You could pick up a bottle and like move it, and the liquid inside reacts to the way that you're moving the bottle in VR space. And that is incredible. So it's like these gimmicks that used to be parts of each and every little game, they've unified it. And I want to see more of that. I hope that I'm excited to see like new VR experiences where you take the social aspects of VR chat, and then put them in a weird game that you wouldn't expect, like a flight simulator, but you ultimately get like what PUBG had, where you had this shooter, but it had 100-player social experiment. It was weird. So I want to see things where they aren't just they're taking all of these, I'll call them gimmicks, because alone you're paying for a single lane experience. Doesn't really have much variety to offer other than something that a VR developer figured out how to do and no one else did. So I want to see something like, like a burger flipping simulator, but with like
card shop simulator, grocery store simulator, power washing simulator,
them all in there.
Farming simulator. We've got a lot of them.
Let's unify it. Let's make something called Economy Simulator and then make it VR. You just choose a fucking job and you just
do all of the above.
Yeah. You don't need Job Simulator or Vacation Simulator.
Vacation Simulator. Let's play a game where we're pretending to go on vacation. That's the American way right there.
Yeah. Same thing with the hardware though. I don't want to have two sets of controllers for different games. I don't want to have to put on trackers if I can just, I don't want to have to wear special shoes to use a treadmill.
And therein lies a challenge for a lot of the gaming developers, is like, if you're developing a game for the Oculus, it's specifically for the Oculus, right? And then it's not available on other VR platforms. And then if you're trying to develop a game that's just for use on PlayStation, Xbox, PC, like you're trying to make it universally purchasable, and then you're trying to make it VR. Well, there isn't a VR that really like encompasses all of those things. And if you are trying to make it universally VR applicable, you can't make it as immersive as you would like it to be, because you aren't specifically gearing it for each of those technologies, right? So you run into this problem of how do I get a wide enough community to make it worth building a game in this space, at the same time of how do I make it the most immersive game possible, and you don't know the technology. That's one of the challenges of like saying building a game for multiple consoles, building a game for PlayStation, Xbox, and PC. You know, you can build a game for PlayStation and know exactly the specs of the PlayStation. You know what controller they're using, you know the hardware specifications, you can tune the game to run on that specific hardware at the best performance levels. Same thing with Xbox. You can build it so that they're running on an Xbox, this, you know, the controller, the performance specs, everything. But when you're doing it with PC and you're doing it across platforms, you know, for PC, you have to tune it to the least common denominator, and you have to have these scaling technical specs that you have to allow for adjustment back and forth, or people aren't going to be able to play your game. And if you don't have a wide market being able to at least load your game and play, that's like the death knell for anything. Because money is, we can dance around it all day long, but like if your game's not making money, or if your application isn't making money, then you know it's going to die.
Yeah, that's where it comes in. You brought up a really big thing in the VR community. The best and the worst thing to happen to VR was Oculus. And I'll start with the good things, because the best part about it is it has unified a lot of standards. It has brought down to where, like, okay, if you're going to make a game, at least start with making a game compatible with the Quest, and then move from there. Maybe you can consider a PC port, maybe a PlayStation port. And then, of course, all of the other headsets and controllers that go with those other PC headsets. So it's like you kind of run into a lot of full stops if you don't know what you're doing. And it requires a comprehensive team, which is more money. So it's kind of like, look, if you start with a Quest and PC, you know, maybe choose a couple headsets for PC, and then that's the scope of your project. But if you are just a single dev, you know, make a good Quest game and then see where it takes you from there. So like the standard really seems to be, well, make a game for the Quest. And or if you have a PC version, you kind of bridge the gap later on, but your sales are going to be in the Quest. The PC is the experiment. As much as you would like to see the PC headsets get the love, it's just not, it doesn't make the money because the headsets are not in the hands of the people. It's not, the barrier to access is barrier to entry is so sky high for PC VR gaming. Now it is qualitative, but if you just want to shoot some zombies in VR and you don't really care what it looks like and you don't want to be tethered, then the Oculus is obviously going to be the best bet, and that's what people seem to want. So the best part is everyone is able to access PC or VR and still play with other PC VR users in some of the more popular games with just like $200. You can just go to your Best Buy. You know, you can go on a buy and sell and buy a hand-me-down one for like $100, $150. The barrier to entry is crazy. You can get all three of your kids for Christmas a goddamn perfectly brand new VR headset, and it's still under $1,000. Like, that is bananas, but you can do that. And I think that's what's like, it's crazy that what the Quest has done to the market. Now, the bad thing is it's really stifled a progression. People and developers alike, like gamers and developers alike, really want more qualitative experiences, and you just can't do that with the limitations of the Quest. For a good while, PC VR was catching on really hard. Oculus started on PC. It was a PC VR headset, but they needed their niche, their niche, and they found it in making their standalone headset. A lot of people don't know this, but they were operating at a loss for years, and did that. They did that so they could take control of the VR market, and it worked. And now, because they are the standard, everyone's jumping ship. Everyone's had these games that were traditionally PC VR and have now jumped ship to Oculus. And I say jump ship because they're completely leaving their old games behind. And the new ones are going to be more Quest oriented as opposed to PC VR. And then, you know, Quest players can kind of play. Like, it's completely reversed now. So qualitative experiences were what we were working towards in the VR developing community, and as a player demand, we're moving into we were moving into the direction of quality. And again, that's where like Half-Life Alyx came involved. That's why Half-Life Alyx is not available on your Quest, because it is a qualitative VR experience. It's not something that is meant to be thrown into a Quest headset and ran for money. It's not it. And in fact, I'm pretty sure Half-Life Alyx still hasn't made their money back. Like that is a game that has also operated at a loss. So but from my understanding, they knew that it had nothing to do with like making money in as much as pushing the brand and seeing what was available for VR in that capacity. And they blew it out of the water, honestly. I think that it was amazing, but it's still very expensive, and it's expensive to get. You have to buy the game. Like there's a lot of cost into having that experience. Whereas again, like a $200 Quest, he's like, well, I'll just go shoot zombies, and it's similar, you know.
Speaking to the hardware costs and operating at a loss, I mean that's been a thing within like the gaming industry for a long time.
Yeah.
So like I mean all the way back to like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, PlayStation 1, all the way up to PlayStation 5, Xbox, like get DS's, 64s. GameCubes, everything. They all operate the hardware at a loss. And the reason is they make money on the games eventually, right? And the problem with VR, like operating, they have to get the hands of they have to get Oculuses, they have to get the headsets into the hands of people, because if people aren't demanding more VR games, people aren't going to develop more VR games. And so when you launch a console, like if you launch the PS5, you need to have 5 or 6 headline titles to be like, okay, this is what we're promising you, and eventually there's going to be more stuff coming out. Right. And so with Half-Life Alyx, for example, Steam needed a game that people were going to be excited about to buy their headset. And so not only was Half-Life Alyx developed to specifically be a game that is a loss leader, but also the hardware was developed to be a loss leader, so that Steam as a platform would have more people developing games to utilize that technology. And so they wanted to open up the space. And that really is a huge challenge, because they're pioneering into a new space. They know that they're selling these things at a loss so that eventually they can recoup it on making money on the fact that VR games explode eventually, because everybody knows that industry is going to explode at some point, just absolutely dominate the space once people have accepted the having to buy the hardware, having to integrate it into their systems. Developers have accepted that if we develop for these style, or if we develop for VR, we are going to be able to turn a profit doing so. But it's not there yet. It's not quite there yet. And, speaking to future aspirations, I think we both can agree that, we want that to become a thing that happens in the future. It's just a question of when, not necessarily if. And these are, putting the technology in the hands of the people is the first step of making it really happen. I'm glad to see some of these companies actually doing that within their spaces. You can criticize the Oculus, or you can criticize Valve's hardware, or whatever you want for various reasons, but they're trying to be pioneers in that space.
Yeah, there's some who are operating as pioneers in entrepreneurship and industry, and then there are the others who are pushing boundaries artistically and mechanically with what you can do with VR. And I feel like almost industry is predatory off of that. So it requires artist revolutionary kind of thinking. And then industry says, I'm going to take that and put it in my Half-Life Alyx game. Or, they're not copywriting game mechanics. And so, of course, they can do that and only the people who are relevant in the contemporary VR experience at the time will be like, hey, I know where that's from. I know that's an idea pulled from this game. And that game was the one to do it first. Most people just accept it as a nod. Hey, to make a game where Half-Life decided they were going to put that in their flagship Half-Life title, that is cool. But of course there's no mention to it. You just kind of have to know. And I hope that history is more preserved in a linear fashion that way, where you say, well, this game was generally accepted to be the first to do that. And then, because there's a lot of people who say, wow, Final Fantasy did this, or Pokemon did that. And it's like, no, none of those they didn't come up with those ideas originally. You know, those were ripped from this game, and that came out like 10 years ago or some, so.
You mean Pokemon didn't pioneer the walking RPG?
Exactly.
Pokemon didn't pioneer turn-based combat?
Nothing.
Pokemon didn't pioneer collecting your characters that you can do battle with in your team?
And that's the crazy thing, is they parade around as if they did. And history, we're hoping, does not record them as doing so, because there were so many people who artistically revolutionized that, whether a platform or a genre. And it's happening the same in VR. It's like you're just watching these industries and entrepreneurs, like fashions, just kind of pop up and then take from the community to create what they can, but the only benefit they have is money. So, of course, there are the exceptions. Like you've got, for example, Gorilla Tag. Gorilla Tag is like huge with the youth in VR, but it is a top selling game for VR. Actually, I don't know if it's free. Pretty sure I can't remember, but it's a big game. And that's just some artist who said, I want to make a really cool game. And you don't need a complex marketing scheme to sell a game. You just need a good idea. But it isn't, it's not going to be very long before industry takes that and says, well, we're going to push this a little bit more because we have many developers that can throw this idea into the churn. But yeah, you do have that. I do say that, like, the Quest, kind of wrapping back, is like, it was a great thing, but it stifled competition. We don't have another headset that is, self-contained. We don't have other headsets that are doing what the Quest does, because they stomped them out. They stomped them out for as long as they could, and they held on. And I mean, it's not like illegal, and it's a very well-known business tactic. It's not crazy, but it's just money outcompetes people without it. So you get only the ideas from those who have money. And
I mean, why do you think Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo are the only people producing consoles? Like, why do you think Sega was pushed out of the market? Why do you think that there isn't anybody else that's trying to push into it? Is just, it's so hard to, it costs so much money to produce the consoles themselves. The medium that you play the games on, the platform that you play your games on. And so for, the headsets, until there is some kind of universal standard for all things VR, people aren't going to be able to, people aren't going to have a dozen different options for different kinds of VR headsets with a dozen different companies trying to produce for it. And even if they did have a dozen different companies, that still wouldn't be like the most free market system that's out there. You're going to end up having, a handful of companies, 2, 3, 4 that are really like the industry standard. And then beyond that, most people aren't really going to be able to compete into that. Maybe you'll have off-brand controllers. Maybe you'll have off-brand accessories for these different things. But you're not going to have the headset itself, because the headset itself is, your primary platform.
Yeah, it's a console right there. But I do think that it just doesn't have the competition, or what I would argue would be the healthiest of competitions, because you've basically got Quest and then PC VR, and PC VR is like a whole branch of options. So, like, in other words, there is a competition for PC VR headsets, but there's not a competition for any Meta Quest headsets. Maybe the Quest 2 and the Quest 3. That's it. That's all you get. If you want to give your kid a VR for Christmas, well, are you prepared to get him a computer? If not, that's the Quest. Like, you don't have options. There is no option. You have one option. That's it. And that's what they fought for. Now, fortunately, PC VR, as much as it is crazy to see it kind of on a dying end of usership, it's like there are a lot of people who are betting that one day it will be kind of unified. But it's hard to see what that looks like, because there's just no one working together on this. Everyone wants their own little piece of the cake, and they're, I don't know.
I mean, PC gaming in general has been incredibly expensive forever.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, a console is $500, $600. I mean, people can say that that's very expensive, but like, if you want a mid-tier gaming PC, you're in for like $1,500. So you're double, triple price on a gaming PC. And then if you want something that is like high end, like top of the line, you're in for thousands of dollars, $4,000 or $5,000 for something that's cutting edge. And people don't have that kind of money to sling around. People don't have, like, like a car payment for a year on their PC trying to like make the things accessible. Whereas consoles much more prevalent. And of course, if a console is your primary thing, Sony, Microsoft are going to have their form of VR, or they're just going to say that it's not worth having their VR. And the same thing with Meta, like the Meta Quest stuff. That's Meta. That's their own thing, making their product for the things that they're trying to support. They're trying to make their Meta platform, their Meta VR platform, something that is, the first real thing that first real place where people are really putting a lot of money and focus into it, because they truly believe that, essentially, like I brought it up a million times at this point, but like the Ready Player One scenario, people are talking about Fortnite being like the new place. Like if they put VR into Fortnite, that would essentially be Ready Player One.
Yeah, people have been wanting. They're getting it. It's gonna happen. They've been looking at doing Fortnite VR for a while. I don't think that they've got a sellable experience yet, but I know it's coming and it's gonna happen. I liked the Ender's game reminded me a lot of the movie Gamer with
the Gamer. Yep, where you have the guys controlling like convicts in virtual reality. Yep, familiar with that one as well.
I think those are crazy. I like to see though how they interpret the hardware, and in that space, it's more like you're just you are the controller, and you're kind of like in this cylindrical virtual space where. I thought that was really cool how they expressed it in Gamer, and I think that like moving forward with how would you augment these experiences, and what are we excited to see things get to? And it's funny because it's almost like the goal is to remove the VR headset eventually. Like we just want a virtual experience. Like the true holodeck experience is what we really want. A VR. We don't want
maybe in a long time. Maybe in a long time we can get a holodeck. I mean, Star Trek didn't even have a holodeck until Next Generation, right? Like they didn't even have a holodeck at that point.
Well, that's what I'm saying is hopefully, maybe in this galaxy. Wait, nope.
Same galaxy.
Damn, yep, same galaxy. Okay, well, this timeline, this quantum timeline that we're experiencing, maybe we'll get it faster than them.
Maybe.
But I think ultimately the goal is to eventually remove the headset. We want to make it as small as possible, as light as possible. It's like, well, fuck, get rid of it.
Yeah.
And eventually we will.
Give me my VR room. Give me my holograms.
Exactly. So I think that's interesting. It's like we'll still be talking about the same movies, the same stuff, but different headsets. It's kind of like the consoles will move forward. We had the OG brick of a PC Xbox, and now we've got these giganto brick of an Xbox today, and it's it's not really the technological leap. I mean, they're not really that much smaller. Remember the first time I saw the new PS5, I was like, dang, they don't really care about it.
It's big. It's big, but I mean, it has to be able to cool down the hardware. It's very like, every technology cycle, things are getting half as big and twice as powerful. That's just kind of the nature of technology. But there's always going to be power demand and heat. Those are the things that need to be mitigated, because everything, it gets smaller, but it still requires power, and it's still going to generate a ton of heat. And so, you can make your headsets more compact, but it's going to be, it's going to demand more power. It's going to produce more heat. It's going to be less stable. Like the more compact that it gets, the less stable it's going to be. So, it's interesting to see where the technology moves forward as we kind of get more access to more cool stuff, and what different companies end up doing with them. But I have high hopes that it'll settle somewhere.
Yeah, I think so too. We'll see what it brings us, man. I'm excited. It's really the right word.
Yeah. Well, I've been very excited to speak with you about VR today. It was awesome to have you as a guest for the Pseudo First podcast. Do you have any closing thoughts, any thoughts and feelings that you want to leave us with, Mr. Swausage?
Just kind of pumped on the topic of VR. I think that if you still haven't had one and maybe you're unsure about it, like I said, those buy and sell local market kind of hand-me-down options exist for like Oculus headsets. You can grab them for $150 if you're lucky. On the high-end brand new, you can find them for like $200 to $400 depending on how much space you want on your, storage. So other than that, the experience is the same. So just kind of fit in where you get in on the good price. But I would recommend to lock it in. Like if you're like, think of other things that you could spend that same money on, and then a headset would last you how much longer of an experience? You might find something you like, whether it's a tool, whether it's for leisure. Maybe you just want to get away. You got all sorts of things you could do with a VR headset. Just consider it. That's all I'm saying. Expand your knowledge of the technological landscape that we throw out there today, and kind of understand, what people are looking at. You're kind of left out of the loop until you're able to hop in it somehow. Even if it's whether just to have an opinion because it's important. If you have an entire generation and now the next generation of youth, experiencing these things, maybe it'd be cool to find out what the hubbub is all about, So I would say
people spend a lot of money on the towers that are like their computers themselves and the technology inside of them. And then they don't think a second thought about the monitors that they look at stuff on. Like I've got people that I know that have 4090s that are, on some $10 monitor they picked up at Goodwill. Yep. And I'm like, dude, you have a thing that can do 4K HD and you can't even play your game in 1080p. So it is kind of hard to sell people on that part of their experience and how important it can be and what features that it can produce for them. And I mean, I'm the same. I'm like, I don't have a VR headset. I won't say scared. I've been hesitant to get into the space, but thinking about the fact that like my monitor costs $400, like my primary monitor, costs $400 so that it can do 4K video, be a 4K display. I don't know why I don't decide to spend $200 on a VR headset just to open that for myself, but it's something to consider.
Yeah, and I mean you're gonna find things that costs that'll come with it. Such maybe you want a custom nose grip, little face plate. Maybe you want googly eyes. Maybe you don't like the chargers it comes with. Maybe you don't have a long enough cable. Maybe you want to play it while it's charging. There's some things you will have to, pick up along the way. I can't say that it's just a 200 locked in experience, but I will say that if you just want to get the gist of it, see what it's about or have an opinion on it, it's worth it. And it's always a good gift if you ever want to, like, maybe you have a cousin or a niece or a child that wants to get on this. Like, don't keep them out of it because of how you interpret the experience. Just, share it with somebody at least, because if you can kind of get more people into the know, they'll have more of a professional opinion as they grow older with it. And no matter who you are, you're going to kind of be in on the know and understand why the dangers and the utility out of it, and maybe encourage it to people who need it. Maybe you've got a cousin who's looking at getting a permit for driving a vehicle. Well, maybe you can offer a driving experience that would incorporate that. Maybe you already have the steering wheel and everything for your driving games. Put a VR on there. There's a lot of ways that you can kind of expand, your knowledge of the field of VR and kind of sharing it with other people. But yeah, man, I would say that's really my last message to it is just get into it. If you're already into it though, perpetuate the message and be excited for the future of it. Don't ever call it like a dying medium, because it's just so untrue. I mean, maybe if your favorite game's dying, I mean, all games die.
All things, not everything stands the test of time, but we'll see where VR takes us in the near future, and both of us have some pretty high hopes for where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for watching, guys. We'll be back with another podcast. I say we. I'm sure I'll have Swausage on for another podcast. I should have a new guest for the next one. But thank you very much for watching. Definitely hit the subscribe button. Definitely go ahead and follow Swausage on Twitch. The link will be below in the description. You can see him live several days a week, playing all kinds of different games. And we look forward to speaking with you again in the near future.
Thanks for having me on, man.
All right. Stay classy, everyone. And good night.